The continuous growth and evolution of Gandhi's personality and his ideas through the years present another difficulty in systematizing his thought. Often it is not easy to discover the guiding lines in their purity or to reconcile varying statements made at different times and under different circumstances. There are apparent inconsistencies. Answering the charge of inconsistency, he says, "At the time of writing I never think of what I have said before. My aim is not to be consistent with my previous statements of a given question, but to be consistent with truth as it may present itself to meet the given moment. The result has been that I have grown from truth to truth, I have saved my memory an undue strain. And, what is more, whenever I have been obliged to refer to my writings even of 50 years ago with the latest, I have discovered no inconsistency between the two." Yet another great difficulty in systematizing Gandhi's thought arises from his making no distinction between the theoretically possible and what was practically so. In 1920, he talked of winning Swaraj in 1 year, provided the nation carried out the programs he had placed before it. That a nation, with centuries of slavery behind it, would be able to fulfill the programs was only a theoretical possibility. Practically it was not only not possible but also not even probable. In his book Hind Swaraj, he has talked of machinery and the factories as if these could be altogether eliminated from the life of a nation. He also talks of doctors and drugs as if they could be entirely dispensed with. There are many institutions whose functioning can and should be modified for social health, but Gandhi would talk as if he wanted their entire elimination and held that this was possible. Gandhi's habit of stating his propositions and plans as if they were practical presents one more difficulty in interpreting his thought. He always said that the theoretically possible was also the practical. The difference between the possible and the ideal must be clearly brought out to understand Gandhi's thought. Gandhi's thought then must be judged and evaluated on its own merits and not always on Gandhi's arguments. The student must not content himself with Gandhi's reasoning and his style or the words and the expressions he used. Like every great reformer, his thought is greater than his words and arguments. Often his conduct is more revealing and eloquent than the arguments he advances for a particular course of action. In studying him, therefore, note must be taken not only of the spoken or written word but also of his life, the way he faced and met critical situations, organized institutions and behaved towards friends and opponents. His public and private life was an open book. Therefore, his writings must be studied along with it. The writings alone may not bring out the full implications of his philosophy of life, individual and social. Further, the student must rely on his own intelligence, knowledge and experience for a proper understanding of Gandhi's ideas, policies and programs. 1.4 Nationalism and Internationalism. The popular image of Gandhi depicts him as an ardent nationalist who was engaged in selfless and dedicated service for the liberation of India from British colonial domination through non-violent techniques of political action. This, indeed, is true. Gandhi was deeply involved in the struggle for political emancipation and social and economic reconstruction of India, to which he devoted his whole attention. However, what is often not understood is that Gandhi did so in a world context. His contributions to Indian political independence should not be viewed as concerning only one or two nations in an isolated manner. Gandhi himself had said, "My mission is not merely the freedom of India, though today it undoubtedly engrosses practically the whole of my life and the whole of my time. But through the realization of the freedom of India, I hope to realize and carry on the mission of brotherhood of man. My patriotism is not an exclusive thing. It is all-embracing, and I should reject that patriotism which sought to mount upon the distress or exploitation of other nationalities." Gandhi's movement for national independence was, in a way, aimed at the reordering of the world power structure, which was based on the imperial colonial pattern of international relations. He wanted freedom for India, not to isolate her from the rest of the world, but to promote international cooperation. True international cooperation was possible only when the interacting nations were sovereign and equal before international law. In Gandhi's own words, my notion of Purna Swaraj is not isolated independence but healthy and dignified interdependence. My nationalism, fierce though it is not exclusive, not designed to harm any nation or individual. Legal maxims are not so legal as they are moral. I believe in the eternal truth of sic utere toc alienum non ledas. Use thy own property so as not to injure thy neighbors. By ending colonialism, he hoped to remove one of the root causes of exploitation and domination of weaker countries by stronger ones. As Erik Erikson in his book, Gandhi's Truth, points out, Gandhi and the Indian nationalists maintained that British colonialism had resulted in the exploitation and draining of the Indian subcontinent in four areas of national life: the economic and political, cultural and spiritual. Therefore, Gandhi had declared, we hold it to be a sin before man and God to submit any longer to a rule that has caused this fourfold disaster to our country. Gandhi attacked the evil at its very root. He wanted to destroy the institution of colonialism, to begin with in India, and thereby put a stop to the fourfold exploitation, with a view to restore India's identity. Gandhi wanted to achieve this in a novel way through a non-violent revolution, through the Satyagraha movement. Unlike the Marxist-Leninist line which undermines the individual role in history and maintains that an unjust social and economic system can be attacked by bringing the state under the dictatorship of the proletariat through a revolution, Gandhi held that the root of the problem does not lie in the authority of the state, but in the character of the individual which has made the existence of that state possible. Therefore, Gandhi set to bring about a radical transformation of the unjust social system not through coercion or through transference of power to a centralized state, but through individual reformation and non-violent social and political action. This he called the Satyagraha movement, a movement led by a moral force which is generated by a sincere desire to follow the path of truth in individual behavior and social action. Satyagraha was not merely an instrument for realization of political, economic and other material ends but also a state of spiritual and moral self-transformation in man. Through such a movement he strived to secure an India of his dreams, an independent India free from colonial domination, and where the individual would have the integrity to contribute to a high moral order which would create and maintain social justice and harmony. After obtaining political independence, Gandhi wanted India to become an ideal democracy. A democracy established on the principle of non-violence was to be of a unique kind. Gandhi's ideal non-violent democracy was a federation of decentralized, self-sufficient, self-administered, interdependent and cooperative village republics. In such a democracy power was decentralized. In an ideal non-violent democracy of Gandhi's conception there was no need of a state. Gandhi had said, political power means capacity to regulate national life through representations. If national life becomes so perfect as to become self-regulated, no representation becomes necessary. There is then a state of enlightened anarchy. In such a state, everyone is his own ruler. He rules himself in such a manner that he is never a hindrance to his neighbor. In the ideal state, therefore, there is no political power, because there is no state. But Gandhi knew the limitations in realizing such an ideal. So he added, but the ideal is never fully realized in life. Here Gandhi's anarchy is not the one that leads to disorder but that which relates to a condition of statelessness as a result of the existence of an enlightened harmony that dispenses with the necessity of a state to enforce behavior patterns. The power structure of a non-violent society would be distributed in such a way that each individual or each cooperative unit of individuals would constitute a power unit, and society would equilibrate itself on the basis of the existence of this power structure. In his ideal stateless democracy or enlightened anarchy, there was no use of force in any form, whereas society acquired equilibrium by individual perfection. Such a non-violent society would consist of groups of settled villages, and life would be regulated through cooperation, bread labor and mutual love. Individuals in a non-violent society were to work for the establishment of a social order which ensured the greatest good of all. A non-violent India was expected to strive for removal of injustice anywhere and crusade for the cause of suffering humanity in any part of the world. Gandhi's patriotism was not exclusive, it was calculated not only not to hurt another nation but to benefit all in the true sense of the word. Gandhi had said that, "We want freedom for our country, but not at the expense or exploitation of others, not so as to degrade other countries. I do not want the freedom of India if it means the extinction of England or the disappearance of Englishmen. I want freedom of my country, so that other countries may learn something from my free country, so that the resources of my country might be utilized for the benefit of mankind. My idea of nationalism is that my country may become free, that if need be, the whole country may die so that the human race may live. There is no room for race hatred there. Let that be our nationalism." His movements for self-government, Swaraj, and for the use of homemade goods, Swadeshi, might have come into conflict with the interests of other countries, especially those of England. But then Gandhi's movements were directed primarily against the injustices done by England in keeping another nation in subjugation by force, thereby denying it opportunities for free development. He believed that by enabling India to be free he was not only helping India but also Britain in an indirect way, i.e., by removing the possibility for England to be unjust to another nation. Besides, the moral strength which an independent India could give to other subject nations was another factor which convinced Gandhi that true nationalism was a contribution to internationalism. Thus, Gandhi wanted national independence before international cooperation. You want cooperation between nations for the salvation of civilization, I want it too, but cooperation presupposes free nations worthy of cooperation. If I am to help in creating or restoring peace and goodwill and resist disturbances thereof, I must have the ability to do so, and I cannot do so unless my country has come to its own. At the present moment, the very movement for freedom in India is India's contribution to peace. For so long as India is a subject nation, not only is she a danger to peace, but also to England which exploits India. Other nations may tolerate today England's imperialist policy and her exploitation of other nations, but they certainly do not appreciate it, and they would gladly help in the prevention of England becoming a greater and greater menace every day. Of course, you will say that free India can become a menace herself. But let us assume that she will behave herself with her doctrine of non-violence, if she achieves her freedom through it and for all her bitter experiences of being a victim of exploitation. Gandhi's prediction, indeed, came true. India's achievement of freedom generated a wave of nationalistic movements in many subjected nations. The Afro-Asian resurgence and realization by colonial powers of the necessity to end colonial rule and the subsequent gaining of freedom by several countries could be linked with Gandhi's freedom movement. Thus a colonially oriented world social structure has given way to a more democratically oriented one. The world power structure underwent a transformation in a non-exploitative direction. Yet the world is not devoid of exploitation. The old imperial colonial pattern of power structure has been replaced by new types of alignments and power blocks. The world society of today retains its feudal characteristics in spite of the fact that colonies have received their freedom. The economic domination of a few countries still indirectly influences the less affluent developing countries. The time lag in economic development and technical progress is fully utilized to compensate for the loss of colonial power or realize neo-imperialistic ambitions. Though every national independent state is sovereign and such sovereignty is respected and all states are treated as equals before international law, in actuality the world scene today is a big power gamble in spite of the existence of the United Nations. The United Nations, has already revealed its impotence to settle any serious conflict among the great powers. The great and small powers ignore it in connection with most important problems. The United Nations has degenerated into a mere screen for the power politics of the artificial and incidental majority of world state. Having neither the moral authority nor adequate physical power, it cannot perform the miracle of eliminating war and erecting a temple of eternal peace. Pityrim. Sorokin. It is in this connection that the Gandhian view of a world social order merits consideration. Gandhi did not believe in the efficacy of a United Nations, because the United Nations, for all its virtues, is no help to creating, maintaining or enlarging the number of states. A modern state, with its military strength, always possesses potentialities for suppression of freedom internally and creation of wars or international conflicts externally. The establishment of a world state by merely extending the characteristics of a modern state, with or without surrendering national sovereignties, would suffer from the deficiencies of the latter, when viewed from a Gandhian angle. A world sovereign state above all national states may, after all, not be able to establish or maintain a peaceful world society, in spite of the military strength or power it may possess. Gandhi's opposition to the UN is to be understood in this perspective. He was opposed to the UN insofar as it possessed the attributes of a nation-state in regard to military potential and in regard to its opposition to decentralization of power and freedom of human development. However, it may not be construed from this that Gandhi was totally opposed to any type of international organization. If the UN functioned on the basis of the moral principles, Gandhi would not have difficulty in accepting the same. The following quotations of Gandhi are of significance in the context of his understanding of nationalism and internationalism. I would like to see India free and strong so that she may offer herself as a willing and pure sacrifice for the betterment of the world. The individual being pure sacrifices himself for the family, the latter for the village for the district for the province for the nation for all. My religion has no geographical limits. There is no limit to extending our services to our neighbors across state-made frontiers. I believe that true democracy can only be an outcome of non-violence. The structure of a world federation can be raised only on a foundation of non-violence. And violence will have to be totally given up in world affairs. I do want to think in terms of the whole world. My patriotism includes the good of mankind in general. Therefore, my service to India includes the service of humanity. Isolated independence is not the goal of the world state. It is voluntary independence. I want to make no grand claim for our country. But I see nothing grand or impossible about our expressing our readiness for universal interdependence rather than independence. I desire the ability to be totally independent without asserting the independence. Such a federation of independent sovereign states will not circumscribe the national state but would permit it full freedom, will remove the causes of friction and conflict that may arise from time to time and promote harmony and social justice. In the words of Jawaharlal Nehru, Gandhi was an intense nationalist. He was also at the same time a man who felt he had a message not only for India but for the world, and he ardently desired world peace. His nationalism, therefore, had a certain world outlook and was entirely free from any aggressive intent. Desiring the independence of India, he had come to believe that a world federation of interdependent states was the only right goal, however distant that might be. The Gandhian model of power distribution in a national or world context is enunciated in the following statement, which Gandhi made in elucidating his concept of decentralized state power: there will be ever widening, never ascending circles, at last the whole becomes one life composed of individuals, never aggressive in their arrogance but ever humble, sharing the majesty of the oceanic circle of which they are integral units. Therefore, the outermost circumference will not wield power to crush the inner circle, but will give strength to all within and derive its own strength from the center. The Gandhian view of a world social order is essentially one of a moral order. Satyagraha, soul force, symbolized for Gandhi the attainment of moral ends through moral means. Satyagraha as a philosophy of social action was not merely an instrument to attain political, economic and other material ends, but for the spiritual and moral transformation of man. It was a soul force generated out of a motivation to follow the path of truth and non-violence, and was based on self-help, self-sacrifice and faith in God. Gandhi's theory of non-violence is a positive philosophy and not a passive ethics. It is based on the assumption that men who wish to practice it must have certain moral and spiritual prerequisites, a positive love for all beings and the pursuit of truth. The tradition of non-violence perhaps existed in all cultures, but Gandhi converted it into a practical ethics, which could be applied in day-to-day life. This offered tremendous possibilities for contemporary India as well as the whole world. Here was an alternative to physical force, which had so far been acknowledged as the sine qua non of the social order in the soul force, Satyagraha, or the spiritual and moral power. Acharya Kripalani supplements this point in the following passage. The moral principles which guide the conduct of individuals in the social field must also guide their conduct in the political and the international fields. If we are to be saved from the cruel contradictions of a moral man living in an immoral, or at best immoral, political and international world order, we must find a unifying principle in life which will save us from this moral dichotomy. This unifying principle, Gandhi holds, is supplied as in social life so in political and international life and conduct by morality. Assessing the contributions of Gandhi, Albert Schweitzer wrote, Gandhi continues what Buddha began. In the Buddha, the spirit of love set itself the task of creating different spiritual conditions in the world. In Gandhi, it undertakes to transform all worldly conditions. Would the world tend to order itself in the directions indicated by Buddha and Gandhi, or dismiss them as otherworldly, utopian, and set to destroy itself by the creation of artificial power blocks, perpetuation of exploitation and promotion of international conflicts? Sanity would undoubtedly advocate for choosing the twin path of spirituality and morality in international relations and establishment of a self-sustaining harmonious world social order. But are we sane? 1.5 Summary. Gandhi's life, lived in conformity with certain basic principles, was integrated and coordinated. It made a harmonious whole. His teachings and schemes of reform also reflect the same integration and coordination, with a basic unity of purpose and aim. This unity is not always apparent to a superficial student of his life and his speeches and writings. The elements of the unity are there, but they have not been reduced to a system. Gandhi himself never attempted a systematization of his thought. Like many of the old reformers and prophets, he was content to act in a given situation and solve life's problems, as they arose or presented themselves to him, in the light of his basic moral principles. Like them, he left the task of logical ordering and systematization to others. The solutions he offered to the problems that confronted him, the country and even the world, were practical and often colored by the times and circumstances in which they arose. It is no wonder that Gandhi created no new system of philosophy, creed or religion. Gandhi's nonviolence or satyagraha was intended not only to solve national problems of injustice but also international conflicts and wars. He considered war as a morally degrading and brutalizing phenomenon and hence emphasized disarmament and creation of a nonviolent civilization. Pacifism, according to him, must be total and not partial, and must find its expression in a broad movement that seeks not merely abolition of war but of the entire non-pacifist civilization. Gandhi maintained that the dread of atom bomb or nuclear weapons would not abolish wars or usher in a peaceful social order. A peaceful world social order was possible only through the positive philosophy of nonviolence. Gandhian principles of the moral order are not based on self-interest or individual enjoyment, but on the social objective of sarvodaya, or happiness for all. The logic of altruism cannot be deduced from egotism, the love of society from the love of oneself, the whole from the part. Gandhi's altruism was derived from the concept of mankind, even all creation. Gandhi's was a creative altruism, which was characterized by pure, continuous and unbounded love for all. Thank you. Subscribe to our channel for more updates, and we will see you with the next chapter.